Hi, everyone. This is Empower Your Students. As teachers, we're accustomed to telling students to do things that they might find painful, at least in the short term. But we don't always teach them how to confront their pain, their disappointments, failures, and difficult choices, or how to treat themselves in those moments. We might tell them to deal with it, but statements like these don't really teach students how to accept the pain inherent in living a meaningful life, and might even make them feel ashamed of their own distress. Or sometimes we try to counteract the pain, like when we bring in candy on test days. But then students learn to respond to short-term pain by giving themselves short-term pleasure, rather than how to take care of themselves in the long term. In this activity, hanging my failures out to dry, students learn that failures are part of everyone's life, but don't have to define our lives. Failures are also opportunities to show kindness to ourselves, to see what's truly important to us, and to find new ways to do what matters. For this activity, each student will need a pen and some notebook paper, and also the Failure Clothesline Organizer, which is available on our website, bit.ly/empoweryourstudents. So let's try this and see what happens. Today I'm going to ask you to make a list of times in your life when you've failed. I'm going to do it too. These could be big failures or small but significant failures. They could be public failures or failures that took place in private when only you saw or knew about it. They could be academic failures. They could be athletic or artistic failures, like if you failed to catch a pop fly and the other team won the championship, or if you were in a massive gymnastics competition and you failed to stick the landing, or if you were in a play and failed to remember your lines, or maybe the failure is that you didn't get the part in the first place or make the team. They could be social failures, times in your life where you failed to make friends or failed to keep friends. They could be romantic failures, whether that means you failed to get someone to go out with you or the relationship started and then failed. They could be times when your family relationships were failing or when you failed to take care of yourself physically. Maybe you have a cooking failure or an organizational failure or a failure to take a chance you now wish you'd taken. So now that you've made your list of failures, take a look at that sheet I gave you with the clothesline on it. I'm going to ask you to imagine that each of your failures is an article of clothing. So if my failure to make the football team is an article of clothing, maybe it's a football jersey. What could my failure to get a good grade in English be? What about my failure to finish my lab report on time? What about my failure to get Zoe Feldman to stay interested in being friends with me? What about my failure to spend more time with my grandmother before she died? So now in the privacy of your own worksheet that you're not going to be sharing with any of your classmates, see if you can come up with an article of clothing to represent each of your failures. And just like I did, draw the articles of clothing on your clothesline and label them. Notice everyone has a failure clothesline. Failing is normal. It's part of life. Everyone fails. How does it feel to notice that failure is something we all share? So now I'm going to ask you to focus on each of these articles of clothing and really imagine how cold and wet and heavy and soggy they are. Try to imagine exactly how it would feel to put these pieces of clothing on you. If you get caught in a cold, heavy rainstorm of failure, what are some of the things you need? How can you take care of yourself physically after a failure? Maybe you could eat a healthy meal, or take a nice warm bath, or get some kind of physical exercise, or sleep, especially if you've been depriving yourself of sleep, or some other self-care routine. Now, it's possible to do these things to excess, like sleep too much or overeat, or even work out too hard to the point of hurting yourself. Remember, we're thinking about what our bodies actually need most. And what about our emotional needs? Well, maybe you could spend time in nature, like by going on a hike or a bike ride in the park. Maybe you could see some of your closest friends or listen to your favorite songs. You could exercise, which isn't just good for you physically, but it can also relieve stress. Maybe you could pray or meditate or connect with a higher power if you believe in one. Or just get a hug from someone who loves you. And now think about the sun coming out and a gentle breeze picking up. The clothes get nice and soft in the breeze and warm and dry in the sun. What would it mean for your failures to dry in the sun and soften in the breeze? The failure to make the football team might eventually feel okay. The failure to get someone to want to be my friend might still be embarrassing, but might also feel less important now. And how about this? Do any one of these failures define you? Does this entire clothes line define you? What about the other clothes in your wardrobe? I have the dress of my writing, not always so easy to get on or comfortable to wear, but it fits perfectly. I have the sweatpants of my family. They never wear out. Jot down some of the other clothes in your wardrobe. And what could it mean for you to put some of these failures back on again? Putting the football jersey back on might mean trying out for football again, or it might mean spending time playing football with my younger brother. Putting the dress of failing to get someone to be friends with me back on might not necessarily mean trying to be friends with that same person again. Maybe instead it means expressing interest in being friends with someone else. Write down some of the ways you could put your failure clothes back on. Why would you want to? What's important to you about it? So this week, I'm going to give us all a challenge. Let's each pick one article of clothing on our failure clothes lines, and let's see what it would be like to put them back on. Maybe you're just putting on one sleeve of your flunked math jacket. What would that mean? Or maybe you're throwing on that "I disappointed my dad" sweater and seeing what happens. On the back of your paper, write about what you're going to try putting on. What will that mean for you? And how does it feel to explore that possibility? After a few days, you could ask your students if they were their failures. How did it feel? Why was it worthwhile? You can also reference the failure clothes line when students fail in the future, like when a class is having trouble with an assignment or when someone does poorly on a test. You can ask what article of clothing this new failure is. What would it mean to let it dry out? What would it mean to put it back on? And you can review how the students can take care of themselves throughout this process. You could also keep extending this metaphor of clothing as valued behavior to help students explore new possibilities in their lives. What kind of clothing do you imagine yourself wearing in the future? What new clothes do you want to try on now? What's an article of clothing that's been sitting in your dresser for a while that you'd like to put on again? What's a piece of clothing that's worn out? What's a piece of clothing you've outgrown but can hand down to someone else? So I hope you've enjoyed this hanging my failures out to dry exercise, and maybe you'll give it a try with your students. And maybe you'll try and fail at it, and then you can add it to your own failure clothes line. If you're looking for more ways to empower your students to make school meaningful, you can visit our website at bit.ly/empoweryourstudents.